Yes?
Dinner in 15 minutes.
The eyes give him away. This ordinary-looking man is actually a psychotic killer in The Stepfather, a new thriller and one of 4 new movies we'll be reviewing this week. I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. Our first movie is named The Stepfather, and it tells the story of a man who has a strange and brutal pattern in his life. He marries divorced women with children and plays the perfect stepfather as long as he can hold out. Then he murders the family in cold blood and goes looking for a new family as his next victims. And at this point, the movie executives hearing this story say, sounds good, keep talking.
Oh, God.
As the movie opens, he's just murdered one family, and here he is bringing home a puppy for his new stepdaughter.
I had a dog when I was a kid. He was just a mutt, but to me, he was Rin Tin Tin.
Rin Tin Tin?
Well, that was a little before your time, I guess. So what do you think? Can we give this little guy a home?
Sure.
That's my girl.
Later on, an article appears in the paper about the unsolved murder of his previous family, and the killer has trouble keeping his composure.
Oh, that guy in Bellevue that killed his whole family. Cut him up with knives.
I don't think I know about that.
Happened last year. That's what I was talking about. Now, this thing's a year old, and then they go raking it up again.
This is terrible.
Jerry? Jerry? You all right?
Sometimes the pressure builds up so much he has to explode, and his stepdaughter catches him at one of those moments.
Why don't they just leave me alone? Let me out, let me out. We are going to keep this family together. You had better believe it. Hi, honey.
That's Terry O'Quinn as the stepfather, and although this is a very routine movie in many, many ways, I did admire his performance. He makes a really creepy villain. It was good acting. But 2 things bother me about this movie. And first one is, it has all sorts of really maddening lapses of common sense in it. Moments when I wanted to shout obvious advice at the screen because all of the victims were behaving like complete idiots. Advice like, dial 911 or get out of the house.
Right.
The second thing I didn't like about this movie is, what's the point? If this were a serious psychological study of a killer, that'd be one thing. But as a thriller, it has no apparent positive purpose. It's simply pointless, brutal, cruel, and sick.
Now, people hearing you say sick, which is what I agree with is wrong with this film, will say those clips didn't show me sick. Well, let me tell you, the film company wouldn't let us show you sick. And how sick is it? There's scenes in here where the guy hits Shelley Hack with a telephone that are absolutely brutal. There's another scene where the guy hits a psychiatrist with a 2x4 repeatedly. You and I know that one good hit with a 2x4 is enough to get the point across that the guy's violent.
I didn't know that, but I could have figured it out.
Yeah, well, I don't remember how many, but there is got to be at least 3, I would think.
Right.
I mean, he's flailing away. There is so much brutality in this film. I can't think of a film that was this brutal until we go back to the Friday the 13th and I Spit on Your Grave movies.
Well, you know, oddly enough, one of the problems with this movie may be that it was made at a certain level of ambition, and I have to give it credit for that. If this movie had been made as an ordinary mad slasher movie in which everyone is a cartoon character, that'd be one thing. But this movie does have a certain skill in terms of the writing, the directing, and the acting to make these characters into people that we care about. The young daughter, the wife played by Shelley Hack. The acting in the lead is good, so that we care about these people, and then for the movie to treat them in such a nihilistic way for no apparent purpose or for no insights into them at all, except that this is what happens. The movie of your life starts and you get beaten to pieces.
But I think what they're doing here is really hedging their bets. Classic characters and then just throw in the brutality so you get some box office. A truly sick movie, The Stepfather. Our next film is Julie Andrews starring in Duet for One as a world-class violinist facing a crippling and killing disease, multiple sclerosis. Now, I don't want to be too harsh here, but there are just so many ways that these terminal illness movies can go. It usually happens something like this. There's depression, then denial, then anger, then defiance, and then inner peace. At least that's the way it usually plays out in the movies, and Duet for One, I'm afraid, is no exception. At first, her husband, Alan Bates, not looking too good himself, and I'm talking here about the real Alan Bates. In fact, Roger, as I watched this movie, I was more concerned about the health of Alan Bates, the actor who I admire, than I was about Julie Andrews, the character that she's playing. Alan Bates screams at his wife about her dying.
You squandered away your talent out of laziness and boredom. You're nothing but a lazy, spoiled man.
If I am, you made me that way.
Living on my money, pretending you were working, pretending you loved me.
Shut your mouth and shut it for you!
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. Think it'll make any difference? You're nothing. You're composing and you're conducting are nothing. You're a fraud.
That's it! You never believed in my talent, have you? Hey? And now you're tied to that damn wheelchair. And you can't stand it that I'm not! And that I'm healthy and I'm normal and I'm not crippled. And that I'm going to be alive after you die.
From the moment that Julie Andrews drops a glass, and I was able to call that out in the movie theater, because, you know, that old scene, the disease is coming, so she drops a glass, to the moment she has one last sexual fling, to her final moments of peace. It's all so earnest. Yes, it is earnest, but I'm afraid much of it is predictable.
I'm not going to give this movie a thumbs up because I did feel that parts of it just were flat and didn't work, but I don't feel it was as predictable as you did. I think, for example, the fact that she has this wild sexual fling with the junk man indicates not just the usual sex scene that we would expect at that point, but some kind of real despair on her part. And then the fact that the junk man turns into a human being and she meets his wife, that isn't predictable. There are a lot of things in the movie that weren't predictable, and it was directed by a Russian who now works in America, Andrei Konchalovsky, the same man who made Runaway Train. And what he's trying to do in this movie is something very thoughtful. This movie has gotten some terrible reviews. It just got one from you, and I don't think it's not successful, but I don't think it's that bad.
But Roger, at the center of it, of course, is the Julie Andrews character, and what you've isolated are little incidents. And I really think if you look at the center of the movie, her character, it is as routine as I'm afraid so many of these terminal illness movies are.
Don't you think that sometimes if you're dying of a terminal disease, it is somewhat predictable, and that what a movie like this can do is just bring details to those predictable
Roger, either you liked the film or you didn't, and you're voting down, so, I mean, I got to use your thumb to give you your review.
My thumb is right about like this. It's not down here where yours is. When we come back, we'll review Rutger Hauer as a professional bounty hunter in Wanted, Dead or Alive.
Charlie, you smell.
Our next movie is named Wanted, Dead or Alive, and it stars Rutger Hauer as a former CIA agent who makes his living by tracking down wanted criminals and collecting the reward money. As the movie opens, a notorious Arab terrorist is planning a series of violent attacks in Los Angeles, but meanwhile, Hauer's beginning to settle down to a halfway normal life with a new girlfriend. Now, there's an in-joke in this scene. Hauer seems to be telling the woman that he's the great-grandson of the Steve McQueen character in the old TV show named Wanted, Dead or Alive.
My grandfather used to tell me stories. He would get drunk first, and he would sit on the bed and tell stories about the Old West. About his father, Joshua Randall, and all the other Josh Randalls.
Gene Simmons from the rock group Kiss plays the terrorist who telephones his threat to a city desk while a bomb ticks in the theater behind him.
Morrison, city desk. How can I help you?
This is Malik El-Rahim. Let me save you a little confusion, Mr. Morrison. Tonight you'll be receiving phone calls from a number of people claiming responsibility for what I am about to do.
Malik Al-Rahim is supposed to be in South Yemen. How do I know it's actually you?
You'll know it was me. I'm outside of Fox Cinema.
If that were a real newspaper, he would have been put on hold. The terrorist keeps the city in his grip, and the CIA needs Hauer. Special Agent Robert Guillaume asks him to help with the case.
We need you. Give me a break. Between the CIA, the FBI, the LAPD, you've got 4,000 men on the street. Why would you need me?
This is a flashpoint situation, Nick. We need the best.
A lot of the movie consists of car chases, which alternate with explosions, beatings, shootings, and stabbings. This is all standard stuff, high-tech violence in which all the creativity and intelligence has gone into the technique, not into the script. If they'd made those characters interesting as individual human beings, I might have been halfway interested in Wanted, Dead or Alive, but they have no depth and no resonance. They're simply people who get a few lines of dialogue between the special effects. Rutger Hauer is usually an interesting actor, but here he just seems to be going through the motions like everyone else in this movie.
Aren't you just a little bit... No, the movie's wrong for all the reasons that you said it's wrong, and here's a few more. Aren't you tired of movies that open up with the thing where the guy is retired and has to be brought out of retirement? If they're going to do that, which they shouldn't do, because I've seen it, and I'm not exaggerating, at least a dozen movies in the last year, wouldn't you want to do that like in the first 5 minutes? Phone call, we need you, come back, let's go, and start the movie off and save the first 15 minutes. Second big problem. A lot of this film is shot, I guess, by the director with some crazy intention of artfulness in darkness. I mean, most of the action is in dark caverns, you know, and storage areas and all this, and storehouses. You couldn't see what was going on. And then when you could see what was going on, what you said was, it's quite predictable, running around, people being hit and beaten, and
well, I think the word predictable answers both parts of your question, including the first part. Why do they have to bring him out of retirement? The answer is because that's the way it's always done.
Always done.
You know, what you do, you have a basic outline here. You and I could make it up. Guy goes out and chases somebody, but not for the reason you think. Turns him in, you find out really he's retired, has a private life. Then you bring in the villain. Then the other people have to bring in this guy. Then the villain kills the girlfriend. Then the guy kills the villain. Okay, now, what nationality do you want? You know, who do you want to play him? And we can go to work. Roger will be back with reviews of more new movies. Coming up next, though, however, we'll be taking a second look at a film starring Gene Hackman, just opening around the country. The film is Hoosiers, a sports drama about Indiana basketball that Roger and I reviewed when it first premiered last November in Indiana. It's also had a qualifying run for the Oscars this year in Los Angeles. Now it's being released to the rest of the country in a strange way. The western half of the United States in January, where it's a little cheaper to advertise at first, and then in February it's going to go to the East Coast as they try to build up momentum so they can pay for the high cost of newspaper and TV ads in New York City. Back to the movie. Gene Hackman plays a former college basketball coach who's been busted for hitting a player in the face. Now he's coaching at a high school, and there he falls in love with a young teacher played by Barbara Hershey.
Norman Dale, coach of the Ithaca Warriors, was suspended.
I can't really explain that. It's been a number of years, and it still kind of goes around in my head. I slow it down. Sometimes I really think that I can stop my fist from hitting a boy's jaw. 1 second, everything I'd worked for, it's just all finished.
That's sweet, but much of the movie is a predictable series of basketball games where Hackman's small team managed to pull out one victory after another right at the buzzer. I'm a big Gene Hackman fan, and he's just fine. I just wish the basketball scenes were more varied, and we certainly don't need that background music of triumph. If it is a triumph, my God, if we care about the characters enough of it, we care they win a basketball game, we don't need a whole hidden orchestra, especially when they got a band there that's in the stands that can play. We don't need an orchestra to tell us it's an important moment. I think if the film cleaned up a lot of its basketball scenes, I would recommend the film. And by the way, I have an admission to make. I received a lot of mail after my initial reaction to this movie when we reviewed it back in November, where I said it didn't seem plausible for the big team from South Bend at the end of this film to lose to this little tiny team. Well, I can stand by my remark in terms of movies, but in fact, I'm wrong, because more than one viewer wrote to me that this film is based in fact that a David did slay a Goliath in Indiana high school basketball, and so I apologize to the memory of that triumph, but my opinion of the movie as repetitive in terms of its basketball scenes, that opinion stays.
And I'll say once again, as I did the first time we reviewed this movie, that I think you're real wrong. This is a real good movie. It's a real heart-lifting movie. It's got tremendous performances in it, as you admitted. And as for basketball, they don't win all their games. They lose some of their games. They're way behind at one point in the season. They make a comeback. Yeah, and that's what happens when a team wins. And as far as the music is concerned, what do you want? Bach?
No.
Beethoven?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Silence. Nothing is better. Nothing is more powerful than silence.
Okay, now I'm going to hold you. This is going to be your new policy for all movies. For example, Chariots of Fire shouldn't have any music. Rocky shouldn't have any music. Patton, no music in that either.
I'll tell you,
movies always have music, and usually when the team is winning, they usually sound pretty upbeat.
I don't think, as a rule, hold me to it. I know everyone likes those theme songs. Sounds like a pretty good argument, but I'm telling you this, that without it, you don't need it. You don't need it.
Okay, so
it's a cue to the audience.
Would you like the movie better if it hadn't had the music in it?
I said that already, and I want to say something else. When the movie gets on a roll, why do they always have to pull out the victory at the last second? Let them go out and crush one team. Let them stomp on a team.
I covered high school basketball for 2 years.
Okay, and I went to a lot of high school basketball games.
Okay, and oftentimes it ends in the last second, and it's more exciting.
Well, it always ends in the last second.
That's why. So I don't know why I have to explain such an obvious thing to you. When we come back, we'll review a recent British film named Absolute Beginning. Beginners that was yanked before it got a chance in movie theaters, but is now available with lots of background music in video cassette.
Symphony of Style. Brilliant.
On the home video segment of our show this week, we're going to look at Absolute Beginners, a weird, anarchic, very ambitious, big-budget British musical that failed to find a market at the American box office. You may have seen this movie on a few of the major best 10 lists around the country, and you might have wondered why you never heard of it. And the answer is, the executives didn't think it would play in the provinces. Maybe they should have opened it in Indianapolis, in the West Coast, in the East Coast. Just follow right around all the theaters the Hoosiers played in. But now this movie is out on video, and you can decide for yourself. Absolute Beginners begins in the late 1950s, in the early days of rock and roll, and celebrates the end of Britain's post-war shortages and the beginning of the consumer society. It stars Eddie O'Connell as a young Londoner on the make, and look at the exuberance of this elaborate shot that moves through the streets of Soho in an explosion of energy.
Me and my pals are regulars down here. Every night, the same old young faces. Wiz, a real child of the pavements. Baby face like a mask over his 2,000-year-old soul. A coloured cat named Cool. So called for reasons too obvious to mention.
That explosion of the youth culture is contrasted to the dull establishment life of the period. In this scene, the hero's father, played by Ray Davies of the Kinks, sings of the joys of the quiet life.
Something's happening, but I'm just gonna turn a blind eye. If I see no evil, I ask no questions and I hear no lies.
Get friends down to the kitchen, I'll push them up.
Communicate with minds that are small. With some people it's like talking to the wall.
Absolute Beginners is not a musical history of England in the late 1950s, although sometimes it feels like it. It's more of a fantasy tour through the autobiography of its director, Julian Temple, who came up through advertising and television and who directed another musical that you may have heard of, the Sex Pistols film named The Great Rock and Roll Swindle. In this movie, Temple creates an amazing world. He combines elaborate sets with hundreds of extras and a camera that never seems to stop moving, and he fills the soundtrack with a little rock and roll and a lot of cool 50s jazz. If I was never quite sure where the movie was headed, and sometimes I wasn't, it was mostly fun getting there.
Roger, I saw it last night, and it reminded me a lot of the strengths and the weaknesses of some of the British films that have come from these guys who have worked in television and advertising before, and that is, it's their big movie, and they throw the world at it. I mean, this movie is packed. And I would say about, half of it works and is very exciting. That one shot is spectacular, and I sat there and marveled at it. But then I almost was like at a banquet where they just kept serving me too much. And I frankly got bored by the film. I knew what it was trying to do and showing the class changeover. I think if this movie had almost been cut by a half, or at least by a third, that it would have hung together better.
Just too rich for you.
It was.
To me, the story, incidentally, is kind of West Side Story meets A Hard Day's Night. I mean, that's the two kinds of poles of what they're trying to do here.
Yeah. Make one or the other would be my advice.
We're reviewing this movie for home video. We both saw it on home video.
Yes.
I'd like to make a guess.
Okay.
My guess is I would have liked it better on the big screen because there are spectacular scenes in which the canvas of the screen is filled with amazing sights.
Okay.
And then when they're shrunk down like this, then they become little amazing sights and they don't work the same way.
Well, for one thing, also, the audio would be better in a big theater probably than in your home. But I think of a movie called Pink Floyd, The Wall, which was a great film of this similar kind.
And which also works on video. Where
so that's why I really can't recommend the film, because I compare it against something like that, and I think that's so much of a better film.
Close call, but I'm going to give it this way.
Now to recap our reactions to the movies on this show. Both Roger and I were shocked and repelled by the senseless violence in The Stepfather, 2 thumbs down. And we agreed somewhat on Duet for One, Roger admiring it a little bit more than I did. I found it predictable, but still 2 thumbs down. We were in agreement also on the relentlessly brutal and dumb terrorism thriller, Wanted Dead or Alive, 2 thumbs down. And a big split vote on Hoosiers. Roger thinks it's a quite special film. I didn't. I thought it was just a bunch of last-second victories, 1 thumb up and 1 thumb down. So I didn't like anything on the show except disagreeing with you, which I always enjoy.
I'm glad you had a good time, Gene. The movie that I liked the best was Hoosiers, and I would just say this. I don't know what kind of a cockamamie release schedule they're putting this movie through, but if it happens to open in your town, my advice is go to see it. You'll have a good time. He doesn't agree, but anyway, that's what I think. And that's it for this week. Next week, we have a special edition of the program. We're going to devote it to cult videos. These are movies that may or may not have been successful in the movie theaters, but are now getting a whole second chance at life through video. That's next week. And until then, the balcony is closed.